Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So, the Inspector General of the Justice Department is preparing a damaging, quote-unquote, damaging report on McCabe's handling, on McCabe's leaking information. Now, to step back for the moment, let's step back from McCabe, because I want to use this to talk about a larger conversation. The Inspector General of the Justice Department investigating the FBI's handling of the Clinton investigation. How did you handle that case? How did you come to some of the conclusions that you came up with for that case? Now, this is supposed to be released in March or April. I am going to step out on a limb and say that case should be scathing. If the Inspector General is going to do an honest investigation of what took place in regards to the Clinton administration and how they came to the conclusions they came to, one or two things, and maybe both, are going to have to be true. Either Comey and the FBI were aggressively incompetent, extraordinarily incompetent to a level that they should not be allowed out in public by themselves, or they were extremely corrupt in regards to working with essentially the FBI being politicized in order to get Hillary Clinton off of something that she was clearly guilty of, or some combination of both, meaning a certain amount of aggressive incompetence and in addition to a certain amount of corruption itself. I don't know which one. I'm going to make the case, however, that regardless of which one it is, that woman was guilty as sin, and Comey lied through his teeth in order to get that woman off. And whether you want to talk about McCabe or Stroitz, there seems to be some coordinated effort in order to get Hillary Clinton off and getting Donald Trump on some kind of Russia meddling nonsense. And yeah, I'm going to make that case. So this is the Washington Post article for today. Report said to fault FBI's former number 2 for approving improper media disclosure leading to the misleading Inspector General. The Justice Department Inspector General was preparing a damaging report on former FBI Director Andrew McCabe, alleging he was responsible for approving an improper media disclosure. Two people familiar with the matter said. One of the people said McCabe will also be accused of misleading investigators about his actions. Now, they don't explain what they mean when they said he misled investigators about their actions. That's somewhat ambiguous. The person didn't explain that part. The report is part of an Inspector General's Michael Horowitz's broad review of the FBI and Justice Department's handling of the investigation into Hillary Clinton's use of a private email server while she was Secretary of State. Now, that's the important part of this. That's the important part. Yes, it's true this is going to be somewhat of a damaging report on McCabe, and it should be, but I would argue that the important part of this and the overarching part of this is what the Inspector General is going to say about the overall case itself. What is going to be their critique on the solution? A, the solution that they came to, meaning Hillary Clinton is exonerated of all of these crimes, and B, the steps, meaning how did they come to that conclusion? And is that conclusion somewhat of an outlier? Meaning, is the conclusion that they came to consistent with the conclusion they would come to if it was just random Bob Job who was caught doing something similar or the same thing that Hillary Clinton was accused of? This is kind of the point I'm getting at. If you're looking at this and you're saying we're looking for this thing of being fair, meaning justice is blind, if this is Hillary Clinton, if this is Bob Job, it doesn't necessarily matter. They look at the evidence and they weigh this evidence and they come to a decision on whether or not they're going to file for charges, they're going to indict. If the Inspector General's report shows that there was some kind of fuck up here, this was somewhat off, how they behaved in this case was somewhat different than how they would behave in other cases, that will be a damning report. And my argument here is that it has to be a damning report because this was somewhat fundamentally different than how they would have ran a case if that was any random person. It looks like, and I think a strong case can be made, that they let her off. They let her off. And just before I go further into this, you can kind of understand why. I don't understand why anybody would think this is somewhat of a conspiracy theory. This makes perfect sense. You have a Democratic president. That Democratic president chose Loretta Lynch to be his Attorney General. That president, that exact same president, also chose Hillary Clinton to be his Secretary of State. Now, everybody and their mama understood that Hillary Clinton was going to win in 2016. You know what's a buzzkill for presidential ambitions? Being locked up. Being in prison is somewhat of a buzzkill in regards to trying to run for and be the president of the United States. Did Loretta Lynch know that Obama did not want Hillary Clinton perp walked, particularly if they understood that she was going to run in 2016? The answer has to be yes. It is impossible to be honestly involved in this conversation, at the very least, not admit that Obama did not want Hillary Clinton put in prison. He did not want her perp walked, particularly if he's being a loyalist to the party and he knew that she was going to try to exceed him after his term. So, yes, Loretta Lynch would have known that Obama didn't want Hillary Clinton perp walked. After all, he chose her to be a Secretary of State. And certainly he wasn't necessarily going to want his administration marred by this kind of scandal. So that's the first point. The second point has to do with, did Lynch pressure Comey in order to make any additional changes? Meaning, did she pressure him in any way to change how he dealt with the case? And again, Comey's own testimony, we know the answer is yes. She did pressure him, at the very least, as far as we know, at the very least, she pressured him in the way that he talked about the case. Meaning Comey is making the point that this is a criminal case. This is not a matter. This is a criminal case. And he felt that she was pressuring him to talk about the case as if to line up what the FBI director was saying with the Clinton campaign. Now, the Clinton campaign doesn't have any rights to the office, regardless of what Hillary Clinton herself thinks and regardless of what the Democratic Party thinks. They have no right to the presidency. That is up for grabs. The last thing that the FBI, which is supposed to be an impartial factor in this, the last thing it should be doing is mending its words and mending in the way that it goes about its affairs in the direction of one of the parties. Now, so that's two. The third point is, were there anomalies in the way this case ran as opposed to how other cases ran? So if this was John Doe versus this being Hillary Clinton, were those cases ran differently? Would the FBI go with somewhat of a different protocol in the way it went about its affairs? And again, my answer to that is yes. My answer is yes. Now, if all of these are true, then I'm not necessarily saying this is somewhat of a flat fact that the FBI and the Democratic Party or the Justice Department colluded in order to let the woman off. I'm making the case that there's evidence for it, and the evidence for it is somewhat pressing evidence because, again, either they were aggressively incompetent or magnificently corrupt. It's one or the other, and you can choose. You can pick your pony on that one. I'm just making the point that they acted or behaved in this case in a fundamentally different way than they will behave in other cases. And you're stuck with asking a question. If you hit that point and you say, yes, that's true, they behaved in a way that's different. If you can make the case that Comey lied in what he was saying, if they changed evidence or if they changed their wording and things, if how they behaved in this case is fundamentally different than how they would behave in a case against any kind of random person, then at that point, justice was not blind. And you have to ask yourself, why did justice lift her mask? Why did she lift the veil? Why did she lift the veil? And if you come to the reason of why she lifted the veil, at the very least, you have to start at a point of, it is possible that the administration that was in office, who was a Democratic administration, in no way wanted the person who they believed was going to exceed him to be perp walked. My point is they had motive. If you step on that first plank and you agree with me that, yes, it seems they did something different in this particular case. It seems like they were working in a way to help her get off, not that they were going with the typical way of justice or the typical way of quote-unquote justice, or that the way the legal apparatus tends to pursue its affairs. The moment that you hit that point, and if you agree with me on that point, the very next question has to be, why? Very next question has to be, why? Let's start here. Let's start with Comey himself. So, Comey gave a press conference after he exonerated Hillary Clinton. And by the way, again, just to reiterate, I'm doing this because the Inspector General is doing a report on this particular case, the FBI and Justice Department's handling of the Clinton email case. And I'm making the point that their handling of this was abysmal, and that report needs to be scathing if that report is to be believed at all. And I am also making a secondary point that this video, to some degree, this is the evidence that they changed or didn't necessarily pursue this in a typical way. And like I said, the moment that you hit that point, you have to look for motives as to why are they doing it this particular way. Massive incompetence or massive corruption. This is Comey giving an explanation of his decision. Now, we were waiting for this with bated breath. Nobody knew what Comey was going to do on this. People had a hard time believing that Hillary Clinton was going to be perp-walked. But lefties and a bunch of right-wingers definitely was on the bandwagon of wanting that woman to be perp-walked. Sanders supporters wanted this to take place because they wanted Sanders to get out the primaries. That's somewhat of a grim reason, but that's why they wanted it. Not to mention she was guilty. Right-wingers wanted it because political opposition and also because she was guilty. Now, Comey is going to give an explanation of why he chose not to press charges. I'm going to let you hear Comey himself make this case. I'm not going to show the entire video because the entire video is like 15 minutes, but I'm going to show the important portion of this where he essentially exonerates Hillary Clinton of the email case. And by the way, just because they exonerated her of the email case, even if you let her go in the email case, the Clinton Foundation itself is a basket case of corruption. It is a cornucopia of corruption. So the idea that they let this woman walk is laughable. It is profoundly laughable. Let's hear Comey make the case on why he's with her.
With respect to potential computer intrusion by hostile actors, we did not find direct evidence that Secretary Clinton's personal email domain, in its various configurations since 2009, was hacked successfully. But given the nature of the system and of the actors potentially involved, we assess we would be unlikely to see such direct evidence. We do assess that hostile actors gained access to the private commercial email accounts of people with whom Secretary Clinton was in regular contact from her personal account. We also assess that Secretary Clinton's use of a personal email domain was both known by a large number of people and readily apparent. She also used her personal email extensively while outside the United States, including sending and receiving work-related emails in the territory of sophisticated adversaries. Given that combination of factors, we assess it is possible that hostile actors gained access to Secretary Clinton's personal email account. So that's what we found. Finally, with respect to our recommendation to the Department of Justice, in our system, the prosecutors make the decisions about whether charges are appropriate based on evidence that the FBI helps collect. Although we don't normally make public our recommendations to the prosecutors, we frequently make recommendations and engage in productive conversations with prosecutors about what resolution may be appropriate given the evidence. In this case, given the importance of the matter, I think unusual transparency is in order. Although there is evidence of potential violations of the statutes regarding the handling of classified information, our judgment is that no reasonable prosecutor would bring such a case. Prosecutors necessarily weigh a number of factors before deciding whether to bring charges. There are obvious considerations like the strength of the evidence, especially regarding intent. Responsible decisions also consider the context of a person's actions and how similar situations have been handled in the past. In looking back at our investigations into the mishandling or removal of classified information, we cannot find a case that would support bringing criminal charges on these facts. All the cases prosecuted involved some combination of clearly intentional and willful mishandling of classified information or vast quantities of information exposed in such a way as to support an inference of intentional misconduct or indications of disloyalty to the United States or efforts to obstruct justice.
All right. So that's Comey giving an exoneration to Hillary Clinton. Now, people saw that and were somewhat aghast by this. We had a lot of people who felt that she should have been, she was guilty of sin, out being one of those people. Now, the interesting thing in that statement that took place, Comey said unusual transparency, and made the point that similar cases that were handled, etc., etc. Here's the thing. He changed the definition here. He's using this thing of intent. Intent is not something that's necessarily part of this process. He changed the intent. He changed his bar. It's like saying, look, this is not going to be 100 yards. This is going to now be 140 yards. How are you moving the goalposts? That's what it sounds like. He's moving the goalposts. Listen to this. So this is that same Comey who essentially said that Hillary Clinton was not guilty of anything and that she was being exonerated under questions by Trey Gowdy. Let's see if he stands by that particular statement. Meaning, Comey is making this case that the woman is innocent, that yes, and this is weird on two counts. Yes, she was negligent. She fucked up royally. She was essentially making this available even outside the country, and it is a good faith belief that these systems have been compromised. That was one point, meaning there are real world consequences for the behavior that the person took in the world, giving up American secrets and having those things be available for people to hack and get access to. That's the first part. The second part to this is she was also negligent, allowing people to do that. So it's one thing if somebody breaches your system, but you're following the guidelines and they just breached the system of the system itself. It's a different thing when you said, fuck the system. I'm going to go outside of this and you get caught. I always make this ruling, or I used to have the saying that if Batman kills somebody, Batman is going to prison. Batman can be a vigilante and punch people in his face all he wants. He can go outside the law all he wants. But the moment that Batman fucks up, Batman is going to prison. It is against the law in the way that she was going about her affairs. And she knew she was going about her affairs in a way that was negligent. She didn't particularly care. She didn't care. And people were able to get, or bad actors, from the standpoint of the United States, was able to get their hands on that information. What's important here is Comey changed the language. Comey pushed this further out. So I don't need to get to 100 yards. I now need to get to 120 or 130 yards in order to make the touchdown. That's the first part. Listen to Comey under questioning on his decision to not press charges on this, or to not file for charges.
Dr. Gowdy for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Director Comey. Secretary Clinton said she never sent or received any classified information over her private email. Was that true?
Our investigation found that there was classified information sent.
So it was not true?
Right. That's what I said.
Okay. Well, I'm looking for a little shorter answer, so you and I are not here quite as long. Secretary Clinton said there was nothing marked classified on her emails, either sent or received. Was that true?
That's not true. There were a small number of portion markings on, I think, 3 of the documents.
Secretary Clinton said, I did not email any classified material to anyone on my email. There is no classified material. Was that true?
There was classified material emailed.
Secretary Clinton said she used just one device. Was that true?
She used multiple devices during the 4 years of her term as Secretary of State.
Secretary Clinton said all work-related emails were returned to the State Department. Was that true?
No, we found work-related emails, thousands, that were not returned.
Secretary Clinton said neither she nor anyone else deleted work-related emails from her personal account. Was that true?
That's a harder one to answer. We found traces of work-related emails on devices or in Slack space, whether they were deleted or whether when a server was changed out, something happened to them. There's no doubt that there were work-related emails that were removed electronically from the email system.
Secretary Clinton said her lawyers read every one of the emails and were overly inclusive. Did her lawyers read the email content individually?
No.
Well, in the interest of time, and because I have a plane to catch tomorrow afternoon, I'm not going to go through any more of the false statements, but I am going to ask you to put on your old hat. False exculpatory statements, they are used for what?
Well, either for a substantive prosecution or for evidence of intent in a criminal prosecution.
Exactly. Intent and consciousness of guilt, right? Is that right?
Right.
Consciousness of guilt and intent. In your old job, you would prove intent, as you just referenced, by showing the jury evidence of a complex scheme that was designed for the very purpose of concealing the public record. And you would be arguing, in addition to concealment, the destruction that you and I just talked about, or certainly the failure to preserve. You would argue all of that under the heading of content. You would also be arguing the pervasiveness of the scheme, when it started, when it ended, and the number of emails, whether they were originally classified or up-classified. You would argue all of that under the heading of intent. You would also probably, under common scheme or plan, argue the burn bags of daily calendar entries or the missing daily calendar entries as a common scheme or plan to conceal. 2 days ago, Director, you said a reasonable person in her position should have known a private email was no place to send and receive classified information. You're right, an average person does know not to do that. This is no average person. This is a former First Lady, a former United States Senator, and a former Secretary of State that the President now contends is the most competent, qualified person to be president since Jefferson. He didn't say that in 2008, but he says it now. She affirmatively rejected efforts to give her a state.gov account. She kept these private emails for almost 2 years and only turned them over to Congress because we found out she had a private email account. So you have a rogue email system set up before she took the oath of office, thousands of what we now know to be classified emails, some of which were classified at the time. One of her more frequent email comrades was in fact hacked, and you don't know whether or not she was. And this scheme took place over a long period of time and resulted in the destruction of public records, and yet you say there is insufficient evidence of intent. You say she was extremely careless, but not intentionally so. You and I both know intent is really difficult to prove. Very rarely do defendants announce, on this date, I intend to break this criminal code section. Just to put everyone on notice, I am going to break the law on this date. It never happens that way. You have to do it with circumstantial evidence. Or if you're Congress and you realize how difficult it is to prove specific intent, you will formulate a statute that allows for gross negligence. My time is out, but this is really important. You mentioned there's no precedent for criminal prosecution. My fear is there still isn't. There's nothing to keep a future Secretary of State or President from this exact same email scheme or their staff. And my real fear is this. It's what the chairman touched upon. This double-track justice system that is rightly or wrongly perceived in this country. That if you are a private in the Army and you email yourself classified information, you will be kicked out. But if you are Hillary Clinton and you seek a promotion to Commander-in-Chief, you will not be.
Everything Gowdy has said there is true. Everything he said is true. I don't care if you're a Hillary supporter. I don't care if you're a Democrat, Republican, whatever. I don't necessarily agree with Gowdy's policies, meaning the moment that he starts talking about policy and everything else, we're in complete disagreement. But let's be honest. It is difficult to argue with anything that he said there. He asks just basic questions. Did she lie about this? Yes. Did she lie about that? Yes. Did she lie about this? Yes. There seems to be a two-track justice system where the Secretary of State or people who are in the political circles can get away with stuff that other regular people can't. And that's not necessarily right. How on earth did this woman get off? And even taking him to task on this idea of intent, it's like your standard here. It's almost like you're being her defendant. I mean, her defending attorney in this, as opposed to head of the FBI. Let's keep going, because there's more I want to show in this. One of the interesting parts has to do with the language that they were going along with. So, McCabe, speaking, Strikes, I'm sorry. FBI agent dismissed from Mueller probe changed Comey's description of Clinton's to extremely careless. Now that's important because there's a legal distinction between this idea of extremely careless versus gross negligent. A former top counterintelligence expert at the FBI, now at the center of the political uproar for exchanging private messages that appeared to mock President Donald Trump. It didn't appear to mock Donald Trump. It was calling him a fucking idiot, something to that effect. Come on. Come on. It's not, even if you dislike Donald Trump, are you telling me, are you fucking serious? Are you serious? Private messages that appeared to mock Donald Trump. Did it mock it or did they not mock him? You can't make a choice in that. You as CNN with all of your vast resources to get to the bottom of things. You're crawling through the trash can in Russia. You're badgering older people about the whole Russian bot stuff. You're telling me that you can't make a determination when you're looking at a goddamn letter on whether or not the letter was mocking the person? If I call you a fucking idiot, is that me mocking you or not? If I call you a shithead, is that me mocking you or not? If I'm being derisive towards you, come on. I mean, shit, man, I'm sorry. This is always a pet peeve of mine. I understand there's certain things that are subjective. Fair enough. But the letters were in black and white. You could read them for yourself. What does 90% of the people who are reading a letter in which one person calls someone either like a fucking idiot or a shithead or something to that effect? I can't remember what it was, but it was something aggressive and blunt that they were going after Trump on. And again, fair enough. I don't like Donald Trump either. My issue here is not so much that they were mocking Donald Trump. You can do whatever you want. My issue here is that CNN doesn't seem to know that going after somebody and bashing the person is mocking that person. It's fucking amazing. It's like, how are you calling yourself a news show and you can't even get that little bit of news? That's minor. That's just you calling reality reality. I mean, shit, man. Sorry, I know this is a tangent, but I hate that. Because to me, this feels like you're not being honest. It was mocking Trump. Whatever you want to think about, whether that's good, bad, or somewhere in between, just call it what it is. That's exactly what it was. That appeared to mock President Donald Trump changed a key phrase in former FBI Director Comey's description of how Secretary of State Hillary Clinton handled classified information, according to U.S. officials familiar with the matter. Electronic records show Peter Strzok, who led the investigation of Hillary Clinton's private email server as the #2 official in the Counterintelligence Division, changed Comey's earlier draft language describing Clinton's actions as grossly negligent to extremely careless, the sources said. The shift from grossly negligent to extremely careless, which may appear pedestrian at first glance, reflected a decision by the FBI that could have potential significant legal implications, as the federal law governing the mishandling of classified materials establishes criminal penalties for gross negligence. Trey Gowdy is getting to a damn good point at this. You're supposed to be the FBI. You did an investigation. You've named all of these occurrences where this person lied to you about this. Now, Gowdy is trying to make the point that it's a consciousness of guilt. The reason that the person lied was because the person knew that they were guilty. The person was a Secretary of State, she was a First Lady, and she was a Senator. Are you telling me that the person didn't know that they were supposed to keep better handle on the way they handle their information in governmental affairs? Now, I've always made the argument that the only reason somebody would go this far in order to set up a server in your basement is if you wanted to hide that information. She understands that that information would have been available from the Freedom of Information Act, and she did not want that information available. She didn't want it available. So it is easier to put a server in your basement as opposed to actually having that information available to the public itself. Look, and Clinton Foundation. Who knows where the Clinton Foundation started versus what the State Department ended? Money coming in from one end and money going out in the other way. So somebody gives money to the Clinton Foundation, they get a visit from Secretary Hillary Clinton. Or Bill Clinton. Or Chelsea or somebody else from the foundation. But at the very least, it allows them to know that they have an in with the United States State Department. Gowdy is right. Let's keep going. There's more. So, let's see. Where is it? All right, so this. This is Zero Hedge. Peak FBI corruption. Meet Brian Nishimiru, found guilty of removal and retention of classified materials. In a scandalous announcement, FBI Director James Comey moments ago said that although there is evidence of potential violations of our statutes regarding the handling of classified information, and he gave extensive evidence of just that, our judgment is that no reasonable prosecutor will bring such a case. He added that prosecutors necessarily weigh a number of factors before bringing charges. There are obvious considerations, like the strength of the evidence, especially regarding intent. Responsible decisions also consider the context of a person's actions and how similar situations have been handled in the past. What is shocking is that the FBI director was clearly ignoring the U.S. Code itself, with Section 793, subsection F, gathering, transmitting, or losing defense information, it makes quite clear that intent is not a key consideration in cases like this when deciding to press charges. To wit, what is even more shocking is that according to Comey, we cannot find a case that would support bringing criminal charges on these facts. Well, we did. Here's the FBI itself less than a year ago charging one Brian H. Nishimuro, 50 of Foslam, who pleaded guilty to unauthorized removal and retention of classified materials without malicious intent. In other words, precisely what the FBI alleges Hillary Clinton did. Is lying somewhat of an intent? Meaning, if Comey is making that case where he's saying lying is consciousness of guilt, when Comey got up there and he made that argument, did Comey know that he was lying, or was Comey just massively incompetent? And this is kind of me getting back to my original point when I first started this video. Is it massive incompetence, or are they lying? Meaning, is this corruption? Of course, there's an incentive for the administration itself to push events where they don't necessarily lock up the person who's part of their team, meaning part of their party. So if you're being honest, that incentive is there. That incentive is there. Whether you want to say they want to act on it or not, fair enough, but the incentive is there. Let's be honest that it's there. And again, once you make the case that shows that Comey just lied when Comey got up there and said that, or Comey was massively incompetent, that somebody did change the language. I mean, Stroix did change the language. Stroix did not like Donald Trump. He was bashing Donald Trump and was also instrumental in changing the language to make sure that what Hillary Clinton did wasn't a crime, giving this new scale of this kind of quote-unquote intent. And yeah, just then, when Comey was making that case, Comey was lying about the actual law on this. And not just lying about the actual law, even lying about whether or not they could bring charges against somebody, or FBI could bring charges, seeing as they had brought charges like a year or two prior. If lying is consciousness of guilt, is he massively incompetent, or are they massively corrupt? Which one is it? And in either case, the Inspector General who's investigating the FBI and Justice Department on this, if he is being honest, he would see all of this in the same way that you and I can see all of this, and he will be scathing in his criticism of what Comey did in that particular case, what Stroix did and McCabe did, what all of these people were doing in this case in order to allow that woman to get off. Whether you want to talk about the Clinton Foundation or whether you want to talk about the email scandal, in both cases she was guilty as sin. And I didn't even get to the Clinton Foundation. This was purely just on the email thing in and of itself, based on the information that was available from the FBI, from Comey himself, and from the testimony himself. All of these were mainstream articles. In fact, the basis of the Zero Hedge one in some of these cases were the Hill itself. This is available to the public. This is well known. Comey had access to this information, and Comey damn sure understood the law. I give him the benefit of the doubt. I don't think he was incompetent at all. I think they got her off. I think that he was pressured to some degree to not necessarily go after her in the same way he would go after Brian Nishimura, who did the exact same goddamn thing. So I'm going to leave it at that. Hopefully I made my case. They handled this case in a different way than they would handle other cases. And they seem to bend over backwards, whether that's changing what was required in order to indict Hillary Clinton, or even lying about it after the fact, once they let her off. We've absolved you of these crimes that you were certainly guilty of. And now we need to give an explanation of why we've absolved you of these crimes. What I'm hoping is the Inspector General's report is profoundly scathing. I hope it is aggressively scathing. At the very least, they seem to be going after McCabe. I want to see them expand this to other things. If this information is available to us, it has to be available to them. And you would be able to judge whether or not their report is being honest and accurate based on how scathing they are of the decisions that were made by the FBI and the Justice Department revolving this case. So I'll leave it at that. This one went a little longer than I wanted, but I hope I made my point. That report should be coming out in either March or April, so we will be waiting with bated breath. Thanks, guys. If you enjoy the content, feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you can always support through Patreon. Thanks, guys.